let's see some of the narratives that I've certainly been fed. You know, it was a time where women had control over their bodies. All of a sudden, it gave them greater agency over their lives. That, you know, they could pursue careers because of the pill, etc., etc. Surely, isn't that a universal positive, Mary?
Mary, I'm just thinking, before you answer the question, shall we maybe define the sexual revolution for people who weren't around at the time and maybe aren't familiar with it? Maybe
Constantine's never had a sexual revolution,
I
Mary.
have not, May. Exactly. I've never been overthrown.
Well, I think the most uncontroversial definition would be the widespread adoption and destigmatization of contraception that begins with the introduction of the birth control pill. So we're going back to the early 1960s here, which is when that all started. And in answer to your question, Francis, when it all started, I think there was a lot of optimism. I mean, I don't remember it either, but you could see why people would make the case that this would be a good thing for humanity, that it would free women, as you say, that it would allow them to have robust careers, etc. But what wasn't clearly seen at the time was the negative fallout in the forms of rising fatherlessness, out-of-wedlock births, truly shocking numbers of abortions. All of these things went up in tandem with the use of contraception. And you don't have to be a card-carrying theologian or a religious fanatic to question some of this stuff. In some of my writing, I cite perfectly secular economists, including Nobel Prize-winning economists, who look at these numbers and try to figure out, why did it happen that instead of strengthening marriages, strengthening relationships, and improving romance, the widespread adoption of the birth control pills seemed to have the opposite effect? And it's a paradox, but it disentangles if we realize that we should look at this the way economists do. What contraception did was flood the marketplace with available sexual partners, and that diminished the incentives for everyone, but especially for men, to settle down with any one of them. And so here we see the negative fallout of contraception at its most crystalline, I think, because what we see is that something that was meant to enhance relations, especially relations between the sexes, instead ended up being an obstacle to human happiness in many cases. And that's why we see when sociologists study happiness, especially among women over the last couple of decades and in numerous countries, not only in the United States, what they see is a diminution of happiness over time, which makes no sense if we're supposed to be all liberated now. But it does make sense if you realize that what women always say they want in survey data are families and husbands most of the time. And so the fact that these things are now harder to obtain means that we've introduced a serious new form of acrimony and unhappiness into society. And there's a lot more that we could say about that, but the sexual revolution has a lot of other effects that I think are now showing up, not just between individuals, not just as private contractual matters, but across society. And that's what the last book, Primal Screams, is about.